Electrical metallic tubing, or EMT fittings with listings of concrete tight and concrete tight when taped are generally acceptable for use in damp locations. A damp location, according to the National Electrical Code, is defined as a location that is subject to moderate degrees of moisture. Examples include interior locations subject to moderate degrees of moisture, such as some basements, some barns, and some cold storage warehouses, and partially protected locations under canopies, marquees, roofed open porches, and similar locations. It is important to differentiate damp locations from wet locations. A wet location is defined as a location in which water or other liquids may drip, splash, or flow on or against electrical equipment. Wet locations typically include unprotected areas exposed to the weather, vehicle washing areas, and similar locations. The listing concrete tight indicates that the EMT fitting is designed and manufactured to maintain a watertight seal when embedded in concrete. This implies that the fitting is constructed with features such as O-rings, gaskets, or other sealing mechanisms that prevent moisture from entering the raceway system. Fittings with this listing do not require additional sealing measures, such as electrical tape, to maintain their watertight integrity in concrete. The listing concrete tight, when taped, indicates that the EMT fitting is suitable for use in concrete, but it requires additional sealing measures, such as electrical tape, to ensure a watertight seal. This type of fitting may not have the same level of inherent watertightness as a concrete tight fitting and relies on the tape to provide an additional barrier against moisture ingress. When using concrete tight, when taped fittings, it is essential to apply the electrical tape correctly and according to the manufacturer's instructions to ensure a proper seal. The type of electrical tape used should also be suitable for wet or damp locations and compatible with the fitting and the concrete. In general, both concrete tight and concrete tight, when tape fittings can be used in damp locations as long as they are installed correctly and meet the applicable requirements of the National Electrical Code, or NEC. Section 314.15 of the NEC covers the requirements for boxes, conduit bodies, and fittings in damp or wet locations. This section requires that all boxes, conduit bodies, and fittings installed in damp or wet locations be listed for use in such locations. Additionally, the NEC requires that all boxes, conduit bodies, and fittings be installed in a manner that prevents moisture from entering or accumulating within the enclosure. When selecting EMT fittings for use in damp locations, it is important to consider the specific environmental conditions and the type of concrete being used. For example, if the concrete is exposed to high levels of moisture or is subject to chemical attack, it may be necessary to use fittings with a higher level of corrosion resistance or to provide additional protection such as coatings or sealants. It is also important to ensure that the EMT fittings are compatible with the type of EMT conduit being used. EMT conduit is available in various materials, including galvanized steel, aluminum, and stainless steel. The fittings used must be made of a compatible material to prevent galvanic corrosion. Galvanic corrosion occurs when two dissimilar metals are in contact in the presence of an electrolyte, such as moisture. The more active metal will corrode, while the less active metal will be protected. When using EMT fittings in damp locations, it is also important to follow the manufacturer's instructions for installation. This includes properly tightening all screws and connectors and ensuring that all surfaces are clean and free of debris. It is also important to inspect the fittings regularly for signs of corrosion or damage and to replace them as needed. In addition to the NEC requirements, some local jurisdictions may have additional requirements for EMT fittings in damp locations. It is important to check with the local electrical inspector to ensure that all installations comply with the applicable codes and regulations. When selecting EMT fittings for a specific application, it is also helpful to consult with a qualified electrical engineer or contractor. These professionals can provide guidance on the best type of fitting to use and ensure that the installation is performed correctly and safely. In summary, EMT fittings with listings of concrete tight and concrete tight when taped are generally acceptable for use in damp locations as long as they are installed correctly and meet the applicable requirements of the National Electrical Code, NEC, and any local codes. It is important to consider the specific environmental conditions and the type of concrete being used when selecting fittings, and to follow the manufacturer's instructions for installation. Consulting with a qualified electrical engineer or contractor can also help ensure that the installation is performed correctly and safely. The significance of the concrete tight listing on EMT fittings lies in its assurance of watertightness when embedded in concrete. This is crucial because concrete, while seemingly solid, can be porous and allow moisture to penetrate. Moisture ingress into electrical raceways and enclosures can lead to corrosion of conductors, equipment malfunction, and safety hazards. Therefore, fittings listed as concrete tight are designed to prevent moisture from entering the system, ensuring the integrity and longevity of the electrical installation. The design features that contribute to a concrete tight listing typically include robust construction, precise manufacturing tolerances, and the incorporation of sealing elements such as O-rings or gaskets. These sealing elements create a barrier against moisture at the points where the fitting connects to the conduit and the enclosure. The materials used in the construction of concrete tight fittings are also important. They are typically made of corrosion-resistant materials such as galvanized steel, aluminum, or stainless steel to withstand the harsh environment of concrete. The listing concrete tight, when taped, indicates that the fitting itself may not provide a complete watertight seal without additional measures. The requirement for taping suggests that the fitting may have some inherent vulnerabilities to moisture ingress, such as small gaps or imperfections in the mating surfaces. The electrical tape, when properly applied, can bridge these gaps and create a more effective seal. However, the effectiveness of the tape depends on several factors, including the quality of the tape, the skill of the installer, and the environmental conditions. It is important to use a high-quality electrical tape that is specifically designed for wet or damp locations. The tape should be applied in multiple layers, overlapping each layer to create a continuous seal. The taping should extend beyond the fitting onto the conduit and the enclosure to prevent moisture from wicking in along the edges of the tape. The environmental conditions can also affect the performance of the tape. Extreme temperatures, exposure to sunlight, and contact with certain chemicals can degrade the tape over time, reducing its effectiveness. Regular inspection and maintenance may be necessary to ensure that the tape remains in good condition. In summary, while both concrete tight and concrete tight, when tape fittings are acceptable for use in damp locations, they offer different levels of protection against moisture ingress. Concrete tight fittings provide a more robust and reliable seal without the need for additional measures, while concrete tight, when tape fittings require careful taping to achieve a similar level of protection. When selecting fittings for a specific application, it is important to consider the environmental conditions, the quality of the installation, and the level of risk tolerance. In situations where moisture exposure is high or the consequences of failure are significant, it may be prudent to choose concrete tight fittings over concrete tight when taped fittings.